Hey everyone, Angelo here. Welcome to another design tutorial. Today, I want to show you how to create interactive rollover buttons in Adobe InDesign. In this lesson, I'll go over how to set up hover animation in object states and set up multiple actions to buttons. So let's get started.
Alright, so let's get started on creating our interactive rollover buttons. Before we do get started, I want to make note that I'll be working on several layers here. You can see I have a layer for recipe text, one for buttons, one for thumbnails, one for main images, and then just page content, which is just, it contains the overall design of the page. So I'm just going to leave that one on, but locked. And I'm going to lock the others as well for now. And we're going to be starting out with working on the thumbnails layer. So I'm going to zoom in a bit. I added a couple guides here to help me as I'm placing these on the page. I'm going to click on the rectangle frame tool and then just click anywhere on the page. Again, make sure that you're on the thumbnails layer. And I'm going to click anywhere on the page, and I do want the size of the frame to be 179 pixels by 130. I'm just going to hit OK. And I'm just going to place this right in the corner here. Now I do have some images that I'm going to bring over one at a time, and they are renamed recipe 1 through recipe 10. Renaming your image files will help you, and as you're working, it's just going to cut down a lot of your time when you're working, and you'll work more efficiently as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull over recipe 1 into the frame. And then what I'm going to do is hold my Option key and just drag out another copy. So I have two copies here, and it doesn't matter which one you do this to, but I'm going to click on the content grabber, so the donut of the second one, and I'm going to increase the size maybe a couple hits. So Shift Command greater than, make sure I have that clicked on there. I'm sorry, Option Command greater than. Something like that is good, and then just reposition it a little bit so it's a little bit close to what you see here, but it's cropped in a little bit tighter. So I'm going to click this one again, and let's just rename this copy, dash copy. And I do want this to be behind that version there. So I have recipe1.jpg and then the copy, which I've basically just increased the size a couple hits. Now I'm going to bring that over and behind. Okay. And what I want to do now is open object states, because this is where you're going to have the hover state when you set up your buttons. So to get your object states, go up to Window, Interactive, Object States, and while you're there, you can open up Buttons and Forms, because we'll need that later. So I'm just going to select both of these together with my selection tool, and in the Object States panel, I'll bring that a little bit closer here, I have an icon down here with a plus sign, which is it's convert selection to multi-state object. So I'm going to do that, and basically what I've done is I've created a multi-state object with those two states. So I have state 1 and then the cropped version. Okay, state 1, state 2, state 1, state 2, and I can actually rename these. It's important to rename the states because they're going to help you as you're working. So this one will be recipe 1 thumbnail. Okay. And I guess I should have made a copy of that frame, but that's okay, I can make another one. And what I'll do is I'll just pull another one to the side here. So let's bring in the second image, so recipe 2. I'm going to create another copy here, and I'm just going to increase the size of this soup on the second version. Perfect, and then let's go to our layers panel. So there is going to be a lot of bouncing back and forth from these three panels, mainly at the beginning with layers as well as object states. So you can see recipe 2 and recipe 2, but I'm gonna go ahead and rename this to copy, okay? And I wanna pull that down so recipe 2 is in the front, and then you have recipe 2 copy in the back. All right, so I'm gonna, again, just drag that over like so. And now that I have both of them set, let's go ahead and drag with your selection tool, go to object states and create another multi-state object. And of course, this one will be called recipe thumbnail 2. Perfect, and you can see, just like the first one, we have two states, state 1, state 2. Perfect, now let's go back. Actually, let's rename this so it's recipe 2 thumbnail. Just keep consistent with your naming themes. Perfect, great. Now I can go ahead and let's do the third one. So I have the third frame. I'm gonna drag in the third image, recipe 3.jpg. I'm gonna click on it once with my selection tool, hold my option key down and just create another. You're basically just duplicating the image and then increasing the size of one. So basically what we're doing here is we're adding our own custom animation, which we'll add in the button when we set those up to hover over these buttons. So it'll hover at the cropped version, and then when you roll off, it's gonna go back to its original state. Okay, so something like that. You don't have to go too crazy with the increase or the cropping, just something that's very noticeable as you're hovering over them. So I'm gonna click that, and I'm gonna rename this one to recipe 3-copy, just to distinguish the two. And I'm gonna drag that underneath, and then I'm just gonna drag that one so it's aligned. Select both. So when you hover over and you select both like this, they're actually gonna select together in the layers panel as well. So I'm gonna go to object states and create another multi-state action. And this is recipe thumbnail, a recipe 3 thumbnail. Perfect. And again, just like the other two, state 1, state 2, state 1, state 2. Perfect. So let's go back here. What's this here? Okay, that's my copy. Good. So let's create another copy of that. And I'm gonna bring in the fourth image, drag it right in. Of course, you can go to File, Place to bring in images. I'm going to hold Option and drag to create another copy. Click the content grabber or donut, depending on what you like to call it. Option Command greater than. I think this one is good with maybe 3, maybe 2 is good as well. With that selected, I'm going to rename this so we don't have the same naming structure. So copy. Drag the copy underneath the original, and then just drag it behind the original. With your selection tool, collect both of them, go to object states, and let's set up another multi-state object. This one's called recipe 4 thumbnail. All right, so we have one more here. I'm just gonna, for the top row anyways, so I'm gonna have 2 rows of 5 thumbnails each. There's 10 recipes altogether for this fictional e-cookbook magazine layout that I'm working on here. Let's go ahead and grab the recipe 5 JPEG, drag it right into there. Okay, let me zoom back in. Hold your Option or Alt on Windows. Click the donut or content grabber, Option Command greater than. Maybe 3 is good there. And go back to your layers. Let's call this copy. We want to drag the copy underneath the original, click on the frame, and then drag it right behind the original again. Drag to select both, go back to object states, and then convert that into a multi-state object. And this is recipe 5 thumbnail. Perfect, so let's test that out. Good, state 1, state 2, state 1, state 2. You can add any other effects to these, so if you wanted to put a drop shadow on them, you could do that. I'm just gonna leave them as is for now. But you can see, I'm just gonna move that last one. And you can reorder these if you want, so I'll put 3 there is fine. So I have recipe 1, 2, 3, 4, let's call that thumbnail, not thumbnails. Good, perfect. So let me just realign these. I'm going to put this one on, which edge am I putting that? Let's put it on this edge here, and then select all of them, and let's make sure that they are aligned properly. So maybe just do this manually is fine. So just make sure that they're aligned nicely here. And when you have your smart guides on like I do there, then you can see that it'll show you that they're aligned properly. What I'm going to do is maybe shrink these down just a little bit more here. Perfect. Just so they're aligned on those guides that I created. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add the other 5 below, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so now that our thumbnails are on the page and we've went ahead and added the multi-state objects individually, it's time to add the button structure. So first we want to click on the buttons layer in the layers panel. I'm going to zoom in on that first one. For this, I'm going to go back to the rectangle frame tool, click it, and just draw out another frame over the first thumbnail. Let's make sure that it fits on there nice. Perfect. I'm going to go to the fill, and I want to give this a white fill. Of course, you can give it a color of your choice. I'm just going to do white, and the opacity I'm going to change to about 50%. Maybe even 45 is good. And let's set up our first button just to show you how it works. So I'm going to click on Buttons and Forms panel. And I want to change the type to a button. And the name will be Recipe 1 Button. The event, typically by default, you would leave it on release or tap. But for this lesson, for this tutorial, we're going to select on rollover. Now the action will be go to state. And down below here, you'll see that the state that you've created so far, each multi-state that you've created will show up here. So there they are, 1 through 10. So because it's the first one, we want recipe 1 thumbnail, and we want it to go to state 2 on rollover. But the cool thing about this is when you roll back off, you can set it to go back to its original state. See this little check mark here? Go back on roll off, make sure that you go ahead and check that on before moving forward. So let's do it again on the second, create another frame on the second thumbnail. Let's go ahead and make that white as well. Give it a white fill and change it to 45% for opacity. Change the type to button. Change the name to Recipe 2 Button. It'll be on rollover for the event. The action will be go to state. Okay. For this, we want it to go to Recipe 2 Thumbnail. And we want to select state 2. but make sure that it goes back to its original state on roll off. Okay, I'm going to create another one here, but make a copy so I don't have to keep drawing out the frame. And I could just reference it, so I'll just put it over here for now. Let's go ahead and make it white. Okay, and we're going to change the opacity to 45%. Zoom back in. Actually, let's make a copy of that one and reference that one instead. So I'll just make a copy and put that over there. Perfect. Okay, good. So let's click on this third button, and the type will be button. This will be recipe 3 button, and the event will be on rollover. The action will be go to state, and the state will be state 2. So a lot of this is repetitive, but you'll make sure that you're going to change. See, what I didn't do there is I have to change this to recipe thumbnail 3 and make sure it goes to state 2. So you can get thrown off, especially with many buttons on a page. So do it slowly, take your time, and of course renaming things will help you. So state 2 for recipe thumbnail 3, and go ahead and go back on roll off. And let's test things out so far. So if I click the preview EPub button here, it's going to bring up just a preview of what we've done so far. And this is a great way of testing out the buttons. So you could see on rollover, I'm rolling on and off, and it goes back to its original state. Okay, so let's keep going. We'll finish out the first row and then I'll finish the rest. I'm going to drag out another copy of that button. So that's not formatted yet. It's basically just the frame with a white fill and an opacity of 45%. So I'm going to click that, turn that into a button, change that name to recipe 4 button, change the event to roll over, change the action to go to state, change the object recipe 4 thumbnail. So you can see why renaming these really helps you as you're working. If you just left everything default and not any structure, then it's just going to add confusion. So I'm going to click on state and click state 2, and then select or check off, go back on roll off, and then we got one more here, and then I'll finish things off and we'll keep moving along here. So I'm just going to create another copy, option, drag right over that. Let's go to button for the type, change this to recipe 5 button. The event will be on rollover. The action will be go to state. The object will be recipe 5 thumbnail. And the state will be triggering it to go to state 2, but having it go back to its original state, state 1, once you roll off. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish the next 5, and then we'll move on to adding our main images. All right, it's time to bring in the main images now. So I'm working on the main images layer. I'm going to click on the rectangle frame tool and draw out a frame where I left the designated space. You can see it creates a rectangle in the main images layer. I'm going to click on the selection tool, Command C, Shift Option Command V 9 times to create 10 copies. You can see in my layers panel here, I have 10 copies of the frame, and this just makes it easier when you're importing each image. I'm going to bring them in the order that I have them down below from left to right. So just like I numbered them, recipe 1. And I'm just going to turn that off, click on the next frame, bring in recipe 2. Turn that layer off, click on the third frame, recipe 3. turn that layer off, click on the 4th frame. That'll be recipe 4. Turn that off, click on the 5th frame, and we're going to bring in recipe 5. Turn that off, click on the 6th frame, bring in number 6. So obviously this does take some time as you're importing the images, but you'll save much more time because you've went ahead and renamed them previously. Do you see how I renamed these recipe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? That saves you time from having to do that in InDesign. So I'm going to click on that 8th frame, bring over number 8. We have 2 more here, so I'm going to turn recipe 8 off. Click on the 9th frame and bring in recipe 9. That leaves us with 1 more, so I'll turn that off. Click on that last frame, and then I'll bring in recipe 10.jpg. So they're all there. I'm gonna turn these back on. So it's also important to work from the top to the bottom. This way you don't have to reorder them after the fact. You could see that recipe 1 is right in the front, and that's exactly how I want it to appear. 1 through 10, top to bottom. Okay? Perfect. So what I'm going to do now is select all the frames together. You can see in my layers panel, they all light up. So that's good. Go back to object states, and let's turn this into a multi-state object. So this will be called main images. We'll just call it main images is fine. Perfect. Let's just make sure that took. Yep, main images. And you could see there's all 10 images in 10 states now. So now I'm done with main images in the layers panel. Let's go back to buttons and work our way back down to the buttons. Let's start on the first one here. Go back to buttons and forms, and let's add a secondary action to this button. So right now we have it going to the state where we have that hover animation. We're also going to set it to go to another state. So we don't want recipe 1 thumbnail. We want main images, and we want to leave this one on the first state. So when I roll over this first thumbnail, it's going to have that hover effect as well, trigger that first image. Perfect. Let's move on to the second one. So click on the second button, and let's add a secondary action to this. So go to state and go to main images as the object, and we want this to go to state 2, so it'll be the second image in that main images multi-state object. I know it can get confusing, but stay with me. As long as you rename things, I promise you things will work out. So we're on the third button, right? Right now I'm on buttons. I'm not on those thumbnails. So I'm clicking on the third button. Click on the plus icon to add another action of go to state. So it'll automatically put it under your first state. So you don't have to worry about reordering those at all. So we want this to go to main images, and this is state 3. So it's good that they have the little thumbnails here when you're selecting the states. It makes it easier when you're looking at your thumbnail and then the state in the state drop down here. So state 3 is good. Let's move on to the fourth. Okay, let's go ahead and add another action of go to state. We want this to also trigger the main images with the state 4. Let's click on that 5th recipe thumbnail button. And let's go ahead and add a secondary action to go to state, main images, state 5. I'm just going to finish these up and then we'll test them out to see if they work properly. Okay, so I've gone ahead and added the secondary states to those buttons, or the secondary action, I should say. Let's click the EPub preview and test these out. So here it is. I'm going to click on the first one, and obviously it's going to default to that first. Click on the second, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th. Great. So all the buttons work. All the animation that we set up with the hover effect, with the multi-state object on the thumbnails, those also work. Now, as a final step for the layout process, we're going to add the recipes on the right-hand side here, where you see I've left some space. All right, so now I'm working on the recipe text layer. I have one of the recipes placed on the page. I'm going to click on the headline here. And I do have a paragraph style that I've set up previously. Recipe header. I have the ingredients and cooking method. The ingredients, let's make the ingredients subheader. Let's make the ingredients, the actual ingredients, recipe or ingredients text. The cooking method will also be subheader. And the method, the instructions, is actually ingredients text, but without the bullets. So if you want to turn the bullets off in the bottom right-hand corner of your properties panel, or up here in the control panel, just go ahead and click that to turn those buttons off. Or you can leave them on or turn them into actual numbering system if you want. But I'm going to turn them off there. I'm just going to pull down the text frame to get the rest of the text in. Then I'm going to go ahead and click my headline, hold my shift key, and click the recipe. And I'm going to, actually before I do that, I want this line here to be lined up with the, perfect. I want it lined up with the guide and not in the gutter like I had it there. By the way, if you want to add a line, if you want to anchor a line to text, just a quick tip, you can go ahead and select the text, and in the upper right hand corner, click this little hamburger icon and go down to paragraph, borders, and shading. And then you can set a border all the way around or just on one of the sides. So as you can see, I have a 5-point left border, which gives me a little bit of a kind of a rule on the left hand side there. So that's a quick way of adding rules to headlines rather than drawing it in yourself. And then obviously if you save that as a paragraph style, it'll come in with it, which is very useful. Perfect. So I'm just gonna go ahead and highlight both of them or collect them. Command G or object group to group them. And by the way, I've gone ahead and let's rename this one. You can see it's at the very bottom. This is loaded sweet potato bowl. And I'm going to move it right to the top. So I have all my, I have the recipes already set here, as you can see. Perfect. And what I've done, instead of calling them recipe 1, recipe 2, recipe 3, is actually name them after what the headline is, okay? So essentially all I've done there is grouped the recipe and the headline, and then what we're gonna do is highlight all of them, and you guessed it, so I've selected all of them. Let's make sure that they all are also, if I do align to a selection, that they're all aligned to the left edge. Perfect. Good. So I can go into object states now, and let's go ahead and create another. So this is the third multi-state object. Well, I guess it's the second. Down below we had to create 10 individual. So if you want to, this is kind of like the, I guess this would be the 12th multi-state object. But anyhow, this will be called main recipe text. Okay, and you can see there, if I hit enter, loaded sweet potato soup, roasted veggie tacos, sushi rolls, tempeh skewers. You get the idea. So they are in the order of not only the main images to the left of the recipe, but obviously it's important to get them correct, sync them with the thumbnail buttons as well. So as you can see, it's quite a bit of work to do here, but renaming, making sure that everything is working properly before you publish your work is important. So I've gone ahead, obviously, and created that into another multi-state object. So now I can go back to these buttons down below, and you guessed it, I'm going to add now a third action to these buttons. So right now they'll all go to states essentially. So I'm on the first button. Let's click Actions, go to State, go to the object, and this will be Main Recipe Text. And there's the first one, Loaded Sweet Potato. Perfect. Let's go to number 2. So third state, a third action. Object will be Main Recipe Text, and the state will be Sweet Potato Soup. Let's click on the third button, add a third action, go to state. They're all go to state. Object here, again, Main Recipe Text, and we want to point to roasted veggie tacos. Let's click on that fourth one. Actions, go to state. The object is Main Recipe Text. Yep, we got that, Main Recipe Text, and this is sushi rolls. Perfect. Click on the tempeh skewers. Go to state. Object is Main Recipe Text. Tempeh skewers. Click on the sixth button. Add a third action of go to state. Main Recipe Text. Avo and beet hummus. That's the toast here. Perfect. Click on the seventh. And let's click on go to state. Main Recipe Text. Portobello burgers. We're getting there. We're on the 8th state now, or 8th button. Click on Actions, go to state, click on Main Recipe Text, and point to chocolate overnight oats. Click on the 9th button, go to state, Main Recipe Text, brownies. We have one more. Action, go to state, object, Main Recipe Text, and then obviously it's the oat cups. It's the last one. So it's a good idea to go through your buttons and make sure they all say the states are Recipe 1 thumbnail, main images, and Main Recipe Text. If you've set them all up as is, like this, then they should all work when you publish it. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to publish it for EPub. All right, let's see how the work looks in an e-reader. We're gonna export this as an EPub fixed layout, and to do that, just go up to File, Export, and select EPub fixed layout from the format selection dropdown. I'm gonna hit Save. Now, I already created one, but I'll hit Replace just to show you this export option window. Essentially, everything could stay the same. If you want to go to the Viewing Apps tab, you could see the system default for me because I'm on a Mac. It'll open in Apple Books. However, if you're on Windows, a good solution or an alternative is Adobe Digital Editions. However, if you have an e-reader that you like, by all means, go ahead and use that. I'm going to hit Cancel because I already have one open. And I'm just going to enter full screen. And let's test out the buttons. So I'm going to click on that first one. You can see the hover state works. Good. The hover states all work as well. And you can see that the main images and the recipe on the right are all transitioning as I'm just hovering over each thumbnail.
So that's how you create interactive buttons with rollover animation in Adobe InDesign. If you enjoyed this tutorial, if you found it helpful, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to get notified when new videos have been posted. And if you'd like to learn more about interactive design, go ahead and click the playlist above.